Mexico, 2023. What a trip. We never saw this invitation coming, but now it is clear that God has been planning this trip for a long time. Who invited us? The invitation came from a small group looking for someone who could help assess the feasibility of a choral project, as well as meet needs in the larger evangelical Mennonite community in the area of music and worship. Oscar Peters remembered meeting me 9 years ago in Chilliwack when the choir of the Gemeinde Gottes, Church of God, from Mexico was the guest choir for the fest. At that time, he was the pianist. As a wonderful musician and educator, we found a lot to talk about. Oscar remembered that conversation and suggested my name as someone who could potentially help. I certainly was surprised when I received a Facebook message from Oscar on February 8th. 8 months later, almost to the day, we arrived in the Mennonite colonies of Manitoba, Swift as in Swift Current, and North Colony, in the province of Chihuahua, for 16 intense days. Now, who are the Mennonites who extended this invitation? They are descendants of more than 7,000 Mennonites who, 101 years ago, were part of the largest voluntary mass migration in Canadian history, when they departed by train from Manitoba and Saskatchewan for new lives in Mexico. They were fleeing what they viewed as persecution and oppression by the Canadian and provincial governments. They were resisting the push to Anglicize Canada after the First World War, and the requirement to send their children to English language schools. The Manitoba schools question was a breaking point for them, since the community believed the government had broken its promise to let it educate its children in its own schools. Some parents were fined for not sending their children to English language schools, and a few parents were imprisoned. In 1920 and 21, leaders went to other countries to find a new home. They selected Mexico, and the first group left in 1922. The Mexican government wanted them as settlers and farmers in the northern part of that country and guaranteed them the right to send their children to their own schools. This dream was realized and remains true to this day. It is quite common to find a school on the property of the larger churches. We were quite impressed with the schools. Today it is believed that there are more than 250,000 Mennonites in Mexico and Central and South America who trace their origins to these immigrants in the 1920s. In Mexico, it is estimated that there are 66 colonies with a total combined population of 74,000 Mennonites. Estimates for the two colonies where we spent most of our time were 17,000 in the Manitoba colony and 3,500 in the Swift colony. Originally called Swift Current colony because they came from Swift Current, Saskatchewan. 3 days were needed to get there. A 6-hour drive to Seattle, the next day a direct flight from Seattle to El Paso. Then after a night in a hotel, our hosts picked us up for a 6-hour drive to the Mennonite colonies mentioned. The border crossing went smoothly with a glimpse of the Trump Wall, minimal traffic, and no sign of refugees. Then, for 4 hours, we drove through a vast, rather barren landscape. For the next 3 weeks, one concept would continue to impress us: space. We used to think that streets, yards, roads, and farms in southern Manitoba were spacious, but nothing compared to the colonies. The flat countryside could have been Manitoba except for 3 things: mountains always visible in the distance, the reddish soil, and crops, primarily of corn and apples instead of wheat, barley, oats, sunflowers, or potatoes. The layout of the Mennonite colonies is the same as the layout of villages used to be in Poland, Ukraine, and southern Manitoba. A village is basically a road with yards on either side. The fields are behind the yards. The villages have a dual identity, with a traditional German name and a Spanish campo number. When the Mexican government couldn't deal with these strange-sounding German names, they decided to number the villages. Campo 1, Campo 2, and so on. In the Manitoba colony, many residents live in organized dorps, that is, villages, along the north-south connecting highway between the city of Cuauhtemoc and Rubio. Since the government offices were in Cuauhtemoc, the numbering began south of the city and ascended northward on the west side of the highway, then returned southward on the east side. Places along the highway are also identified by kilometer markings, which begin just north of Rubio. So villages along the corridor potentially had 3 different names, which sometimes made locating a village confusing and challenging for us. To get a better idea of the layout of the Manitoba colony, Jenny and Caesar took us to Mirador, which means lookout in Spanish. From this vantage point, we had a good view of Campo 11. The village's Mennonite name is Einlage, which is a departure from names like Rosenort, Schanzenfeld, Blumenort, Gnadenfeld, Rheinfeld, Schönfeld, names that the Mennonites took with them from Russia, then to Manitoba, and then to Mexico. In this photo, the blue line indicates the famous 40-kilometer corridor with non-stop businesses on either side, predominantly with Mennonite names like Peters, Rempel, Lowen, Fraze, and so forth. Buildings are primarily constructed of brick and cement. Now there's a wide variety of buildings, from the original simple one-story cement house to the very modern. Clearly, some Mennonites are very successful farmers and businessmen. Three cultures influence life in the Mennonite colonies. This is the reason that this butcher chose the name Tres Culturas, meaning 3 cultures, for the name of his shop, where a barbecue takes place out front every Friday. The third culture, in addition to the Mexican and Mennonite culture, is the indigenous culture represented here by the Tarahumara. The Tarahumara live in the mountains surrounding the Mennonite colonies and often work for the Mennonite farmers and families. Some orphans have been adopted by Mennonites. Some farmers care very much for their workers and try to help them. And the Bible school where we stayed has an outreach program for Spanish people as well as the Tarahumara. There's little rain in this area, and this year no rain came. Everything needs to be irrigated. Originally, they found water 90 feet below the surface, but now the average well depth is 500 feet, and a few wells have now surpassed the 1,000-foot mark. Most farmers grow corn. However, the concern for water is causing many to shift to apples. Now, the net gain per acre on apples is 8 times that of corn, but apples are a big investment. Special nets are needed to cover the trees during certain seasons to protect them, their flowers, and young fruit from hail. The nets also provide shade during the hottest months. Apples also need to be stored, and the new apple storage facility built by the Peters brothers and their sons that we toured took our breath away in terms of space and technology.
Hoeveel houdt het?
14,500 fits in the whole store.
14,500 boxes like this can be stored in this facility, and plans are underway for another storage facility. HP stands for Huertos, Peters. In other words, Peter's Orchards. Apples are sealed in an environment that is around 2% oxygen, where temperature, humidity, nitrogen, and carbon dioxide are all carefully regulated. This is modern technology and big business. Each room has 1,450 boxes. And finally, of course, the apples need to be sorted and sold.
It tells us all the sizes, how many kilograms, and everything that goes through to there, basically, for all the apples. We get an estimate on their quality, also on their color. Right now, for instance, we're packing for, we call it mercado. It's for instance, not the stores. Basically, here in Mexico, we have like local markets.
Yeah, markets.
Yeah. So we send it to there. Right now, we are not sorting color, but when we sell to Walmart, or when we have something to sell to Walmart, we only sell the green apples. That's all right now. If you can see it, there's a lot of yellow apples.
The yellow one has to be used up.
Yep, exactly. But that's what Mexico prefers.
The yellow apple.
Yeah, the yellow apples. Actually, some of them, for instance, in Mexico City, they don't like the green apples.
Here we see the boxes of the Peters brothers ready for distribution. The apple storage facility and the accompanying shed makes a great place for family gatherings on a Friday night. We were invited to two different ones. First, the Frank Peters family. Later, the Jakob Peters family.
No, it's not that spicy.
Paus ab, ihr knappt da. It is important to diversify, and the Peters family also has about 700 head of cattle. We also saw a few other crops. Sorghum is drought and heat tolerant and nitrogen efficient. And in the North Colony, we also saw some farmers trying to grow beans in an area where they could not irrigate. Our base was the Steinreich Bibelschule, owned by the Mennonite Conference of Mexico with support from the Evangelical Missionary Conference. Both count between 500 and 1,000 members and are progressive in relation to the far more conservative Old Colony Mennonite settlements in the immediate area. However, the school has a powerful influence beyond these two conference groups and has built trust in the wider Mennonite community. It is a unique school. As far as its administrators and students are aware, Steinreich Bibelschule in northern Mexico is the only educational institute in the world that teaches about the Bible in Plautitsch, or Low German. In the most recent 12-week school year, which runs from January to March, the school broke records with 260 students on campus, 117 of whom lived as singles or couples in dorms. While most of the students come from Mexico, students also come from Canada, US, Belize, Bolivia, and Paraguay. We stayed in one of the suites in the fourplex and enjoyed interaction with some of the students in the university program and meals in the cafeteria when on campus. During the 16 days, we visited 4 different large church-based schools. Each had a unique character, but all were clean, bright, and beautiful. Of interest to me, of course, were the music classes. Here are a few glimpses. In the Manitoba colony, we visited the Blumenau CMMM Church School. In the Swift colony, there were 3 schools within a 10-minute drive of each other. First, Burwalde. Then Ancla. Ancla is the Spanish word for anchor, and Ancla is a Kleingemeinde school. Kleingemeinde is a Mennonite denomination founded in 1812 by Klaus Reimer in the Russian Empire. The group was dissatisfied with the state of the existing church in the Molochna colony. The current group primarily consists of Plautdietsch-speaking Russian Mennonites in Belize, Mexico and Bolivia, as well as a small presence in Canada and the United States. The Kleingemeinde was part of the delegation of Mennonite and Hutterite leaders who visited North America in 1873 to investigate resettlement possibilities when, In 1870, the Russian government issued a proclamation stating the intention to end all special privileges granted to German colonists by 1880. In 1874, the main group proceeded to migrate to North America. In 1948, conservative members of the Kleingemeinde migrated to Mexico. Music is quite important in the school and sponsoring church, but most of this has only developed in the past decade.
Und wenn die Heiligen auferstehen, und wenn die Heiligen auferstehen, dann will ich auch dabei sein, wenn die Heiligen auferstehen.
One key figure that I spent a lot of time with was Theodore Jansen, director of the high school and orchestra conductor of the church. Once a year, the youth of the Scheinfeld Church puts on a special program, which we were privileged to hear. Proficiency in multiple languages was seen throughout our visit. In this evening, testimonies and comments were in Plautitsch, and songs were sung in German, English, and Spanish. We also visited the Neustadt School, which belongs to the Gemeinde Gottes, or the Church of God. Here, the same model as elsewhere, the church and the school buildings on the same property. Behind the central office building and classes for the high school students was the new auditorium with a full-size gym. Upstairs is a room where the older students meet once a week to sing in four-part harmony. In another building, we saw the foundation for music literacy being laid with the youngest students. The church uses the auditorium for celebrations, banquets, and church potlucks. Here, as in many places in the colonies, we saw modern, aesthetically pleasing building designs. This was also evident in the new foyer of the church where John and Lorene Reimer pastored the church. I preached here on the last Sunday morning before our departure. After the service, the children had Sunday school, and during that time an instrumental group rehearsed. After a meal with the conductors of the various choirs and instrumental groups, we observed the youth choir record the song "Bigger Than Any Mountain" for a video to be shot later on in location in the mountains.
He's bigger than my confusion, bigger than anything. God is bigger than any mountain that I can or cannot see. Oh, He is bigger than all my problems, bigger than all my fears. God is bigger than any mountain that I can or cannot see. Bigger than all my questions, bigger than anything. God is bigger than any mountain that I can or cannot see. Bigger than all the giants of fear and unbelief. God is bigger than any mountain that I can or cannot see. Bigger than all my hang-ups, bigger than anything. God is bigger than any mountain that I can or cannot see. Oh, He is bigger than all my problems, bigger than all my fears. God is bigger than any mountain that I can or cannot see. Bigger than all my questions, bigger than anything. God is bigger than any mountain that I can or cannot see. Bigger than any mountain that I can or cannot see. Bigger than any mountain that I can or cannot see.
After recording, they sang a song in Spanish and Plautich. I never imagined that I would hear How Great the Father's Love, sung in Plautich.
Short
One of the other arching goals of our visit was to make it possible for a wide spectrum of churches to get to know me. God has been at work among the Mennonites in Mexico, increasingly in the past 60 years. The picture is complex, like it is everywhere, but we had the privilege of meeting with and teaching those with a desire to more effectively fulfill the biblical mandate to use music to express gratitude, praise, thanksgiving, and worship in a manner pleasing to God. The primary thrust here was a two-part talk entitled Anbetung, Meer als een lied, Worship, More Than a Song. This was held in the beautiful new conference center not associated with any church group. This safe, neutral territory was the perfect place for people to get to know my teaching without committing to me or my teaching. It was well attended, built trust, and led to countless conversations with individuals and small groups. There were meetings with conductors, pastors, and congregational worship leaders from a number of different church groups, often combined with a delicious Mexican meal. God clearly planned this trip, and the future will reveal what else He has in mind.